Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another Christmas movie review. Hope you guys are enjoying the holiday season with your family so far. Now I know we're about 15 days away from Christmas, but hey, that's okay. It gives me some time to review some Christmas-related stuff. And today's Christmas movie I'm going to be reviewing is the 2003 family comedy film Elf, starring Will Ferrell, directed by Jon Favreau. So the plot of this movie is as follows. Buddy the Elf is not like Santa's other elves. He's 6'3", he's human, and he's coming to New York City to find his father. Will Ferrell is a Yuletide, bright, forever charmer. Well, that's basically the plot synopsis on the back of this DVD, and I got this for a pretty good deal at Walmart. I'd like to say I bought this collection pack back in 2022. I think it was only like $20 for 4 movies, so I figured why not? And also because even though I have this movie at DVD at my dad's house, I don't have it at my mom's house, so there you go. But yeah, and also just because I never had Elf on DVD in general, even though I do like the movie. But, so, how was this movie received? Well, when the movie Elf was released to the general public, mainly the US, on November 17th of 2003, it received positive reviews from critics and audiences and was a smash hit at the box office, making $220 million worldwide on a budget of only $33 million, and the movie since then has become a beloved modern day holiday film classic. Now, as for my reaction of the movie, I absolutely love this movie. This is one of my favorite Christmas movies. I don't know if I would put it in the top 10, but if not the top 10, at least the top 15, because I really do enjoy this movie. And now, I know before Will Ferrell did this movie, Jim Carrey was the original choice to play Elf, which I do think could have worked, but I'm glad Will Ferrell ended up getting the part. But without further ado, let's get into my review. So, the movie starts off where we are introduced to Papa Elf, who in this movie is played by Bob Newhart. And one thing I will say about this movie's got a really good cast. You got Will Ferrell as Buddy the Elf. You got James Caan as Walter, Buddy's dad. You got Bob Newhart as Papa Elf. You got Edward Asner as Santa. You got Mary Steenburgen as Emily. You got Zoe Deschanel as Jovi. You got Daniel Tay as Michael. You got Faizon Love, played by Gimbal. And you got the Gimbal's manager, played by Faizon Love. You got Miles Finch, played by Peter Dinklage. You got Deb, played by Amy Sedaris. You got Fulton, played by Michael Lerner. You got Andy Richter, and you got Morris, played by Andy Richter. You got Eugene, played by Kyle Gass. You got Gimbal's Santa, played by Artie Lange, and voice of Lemon the Snowman by Lemon Redbone. So this movie's got a really good stacked cast overall. And at the time this movie came out, Jon Favreau, he wasn't necessarily a big, well-known director. I mean, he directed a crime comedy thriller before this called Made from 2001, which the movie, box office-wise, I mean, it did all right, but it didn't, like, tear the box office off its hinges. But this is really the movie that put, Jon Favreau on the map as a director after this, because after this movie, he would go on to have success with other movies. Like, he directed the first 2 Iron Man movies, which, when it comes to the Iron Man movies, I do like all 3 of those. Yes, even Iron Man 2 and 3. Although he didn't direct the 3rd one, he only directed the first 2, but, he also directed, he directed the 2014 movie Chef, which I think is a really solid comedy, and in my opinion, it was his last good movie. He also directed the 2005 movie Zathura, which I rather enjoy. Zathura, A Space Adventure, which I rather enjoy. And unfortunately, he did the terrible Lion King remake from 2019, which the original Lion King is great, but the remake, not so much. But yeah, Jon Favreau, overall, he's a solid director. And I would say, of the movies he's done, this is probably my favorite movie he's directed. although I do also enjoy the first Iron Man movie. But anyways, getting back into the review. So like I said, we're introduced to Papa Elf in this movie, who is narrating that our story starts 30 years ago, where um and he basically says Buddy is not like other elves. In fact, this all began 30 years ago, which is where our story begins, where we are basically given the story that a human baby was dropped off at the North Pole, and, you know, the elves basically raised them as their own. And obviously, he's a lot bigger than other elves because he's like 6'3" but he has no idea he's a human. And early on in the movie, one of the elves says, just if he hasn't figured out he's a human by now, then he never will. And then Buddy the elf, played by Will Ferrell, is reflecting on that. So then he figures out that he's human. And Papa Elf, played by Bob Newhart, basically says to the character Buddy, played by Will Ferrell, you know, you're a human, you're not an actual elf, and your dad lives in New York City. So, of course, Buddy the elf, played by Will Ferrell, must venture to New York to find his dad. And again, another thing I thought worked well with this movie, not only does this movie have a good cast, I thought that the humor was funny. I especially love the scene early on in the movie where, so Will Ferrell, you know, his character, Buddy the elf, is meant to, like, Buddy is meant to make, like, 200 presents in an hour, but he only makes 85. And he says, I'm useless. I'm a cotton-headed ninny muggins. And then everyone is like, you're not a cotton-headed ninny muggins, which I thought that scene was funny. And again, just Will Ferrell. I know his comedy's not for everyone, but I personally like his comedic stuff. That's just me, and I think his comedy does work well in the movie. But anyways, like I said, Buddy the elf, played by Will Ferrell, he ventures to New York to, you know, go find his dad. And his dad in this movie is actually played by, Walter, is actually played by James Caan, who I do rather like as an actor. You know, prior to this, James Caan was in the 1990 Stephen King movie adaptation of Misery, which I love that movie. He was also in the first two Godfather movies, which are classics. He was also in Eraser, an action sci-fi movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which I rather enjoyed that movie. I think that movie is very underrated. He was also in a 1975 sci-fi action movie called Rollerball, which I have not yet seen, but I've heard really good things about. And then I heard there was a remake of Rollerball in 2002, but haven't seen the remake. I heard nothing but awful things about that, but I'm getting off track here. So yeah, like I said, I like James Caan as an actor, so it was nice to see him play Buddy the Elf's real dad in this movie. And what I like about this movie, especially the performance by Will Ferrell, is because Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, has been raised in the North Pole for 30 years, his whole life, without having any idea of how different, like, the actual world is. Like, he has a childlike mentality, and I think Will Ferrell does a good job playing an adult with that type of persona. You know, I especially love the scene when Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, goes to meet his dad, Walter, played by James Caan, in the office, and he starts saying, I'm singing, and I gotta say, I love you, and then I love the part when Walter, played by James Caan, just kind of stares at him. He's like, whoa, that's weird. And then he gets security, and then one of Walter's co-workers whispers to him, I think we should get security to kick him out. And Walter says, I like that idea. And then I love the part when Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, whispers up to James Caan's ear, I also love whispering quietly. I thought that scene was pretty funny. And early on in the movie, our character, Buddy, played by Will Ferrell, meets this beautiful girl named Jovi, who he is attracted to. And again, like I said, you know, he doesn't understand, you know, how different, you know, New York is from the North Pole and stuff like that. So he thinks that Santa's actually going to show up there when he's told that. And he's like, Santa, oh my God. And then early on in the movie, Jovi, you know, is in work, you know, when no one else is, because, you know, apparently the water isn't working to her place. So she decides to take a shower and stuff like that. And during the nighttime, Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, basically decorates the the building and stuff like that. And then he goes inside the women's locker room, and Jovi's in the shower singing. And then I love the part when her and Will Ferrell are singing, but then she gets suspicious when she hears someone's voice. And keep in mind, this movie is rated PG, so obviously, they had to cut out as much as they could, so this movie would not get a rating higher than that. But Jovi's naked in the shower, and again, this is a kid's film, so you don't really see anything, but she is. And then I love the part when she basically turns off the shower, pulls back the shower curtains, and we only see her head and arms stick out, and she's yelling, "Get out!" and stuff like that, and screaming at him. And then I love the part when Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, is scared, and then he runs into a locker, knocking himself over. I thought that scene was funny. And throughout the course of the movie, Walter, played by James Caan, does not believe the fact that Will Ferrell is his actual son because Walter, played by James Caan, has an actual son at home by the name of Michael, who is played by Daniel Tay, which I don't know why that actor didn't have a bigger career, because, he was in a couple movies after this, but I don't know, after this movie, he kind of just disappeared after that, and you don't really see him in movies anymore. Like, he hasn't been in a movie since 2007, so I kind of gotta wonder, was he blacklisted from Hollywood, or did he just not want to, be in Hollywood anymore? Like, I would be genuinely curious to know what the answer to that was. But anyways, because Walter does not believe the fact that Buddy is his son, he has Buddy get a DNA test, and the doctor in this movie is actually played by Jon Favreau, the director of this movie, and he ends up telling Walter, the character played by James Caan, that Buddy the Elf is indeed his son and stuff like that. And he's like, he's in disbelief. He's like, no, it can't be. And the doctor says, well, I'm sorry, but those are the results I got back. And throughout the course of the movie, Walter, played by James Caan, he starts getting annoyed with Will Ferrell and stuff. Will Ferrell's character, Buddy the Elf, and he basically said, and I like the part early on in the movie when Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, is basically at Walter's house, and he's at the dinner table with Michael, his younger brother, and of course, Jovi, and of course, not Jovi, Emily, played by Mary Steinberg, and it's cool because, Emily Steinberg, not only did she play Buddy the Elf's mother in this, but because of the success after this, she got to star in another movie with Will Ferrell, the 2008 rated R comedy movie Step Brothers, which I absolutely love that movie. I would say that's my favorite Will Ferrell movie, but at the same time, I still do really like this movie, Elf. I think it's a modern-day Christmas classic of the 21st century. But anyways, I love the part when they're at the dinner table and Jovi says, how long do you... Not Jovi, Emily says, how long do you think you're going to stay here? And Buddy says, I haven't thought of it yet, but I thought maybe forever. And of course, Walter, played by James Caan, is not on board with that. And throughout the course of the movie, Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, is driving Walter insane. But Walter's trying to hide it, so he basically tells Buddy the Elf, hey, there's a special place you can go, you can work at, and that's fun, where you can pretty much touch everything you want. And so, walls and stuff. So he's on board with the idea, so he just said that to get him out the office. And, and like I said, Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, is like, wait a minute, this isn't the place he described. And then, and again, this movie has some really good comedy. Like, for instance, I love the whole scene where there's this guy dressed up as... Early on in the movie, there's this guy dressed up as Santa Claus for at the mall and stuff like that. And again, like I said, Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, he doesn't understand how New York is... how different it is from the North Pole. And I love the part when he's like Santa, but then he goes up to the guy dressed as Santa, realizing it's not the real Santa, pretending to be Santa for the kids, with the kids sitting on his lap. And I love the part when Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, says, "You disgust me. How can you live with yourself?" and stuff like that. And then he rips off the fake Santa's beard. And then the Santa and him, they just get into a fight. And, like, the Santa, like, he's destroying stuff, you know, knocking stuff over with a metal staff that he's trying to hit Buddy the Elf with. And then the main guy in charge of the store has to knock him down. I thought that scene was funny. And this movie, one thing I will say about this movie, it is a good movie to put you in the Christmas spirit. Now, I gotta be honest, as much as I love this movie, I don't know why, for some reason, I don't know, I just wasn't, the first time I saw this movie, which I think I only saw part of this when I was like 8 or 9. I don't know why, but just for some reason, I couldn't really get into it. But obviously, over the years, my opinion has changed on this movie. And yeah, I do consider Elf to be a modern-day Christmas classic. And in fact, I actually got to see this movie in theaters back all the way back in December of 2022 for its 19-year anniversary. So that's with a group of friends. So that's pretty cool. But, and, you know, but like I said, you know, this movie has some good comedy. Like, for instance, I love the scene when Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell, he's basically inside the office by his dad, Walter, played by James Caan, and of course, Miles Finch, played by Peter Dinklage. And because, you know, and because he is a dwarf in real life, you know, obviously this is just a movie, so it's meant for comedy. But I love the part when Buddy the Elf says, when he calls Miles Finch an elf, and then I love the part when he gets mad, he says, "Call me elf," one more time. And then I love the part when Buddy the Elf, played by Will Ferrell's like, he's an angry elf. And then there's the whole part where Miles Finch, played by Peter Dinklage, he's just running at Will Ferrell, and then he tackles him up like he's beating him up in the office, like slamming him into a wall, throwing him against chairs and stuff like that. And during this business meeting, of course, Miles Finch, played by Peter Dinklage, leaves the room, and this obviously upsets Walter, the dad, played by James Caan, and he basically yells to Buddy the Elf, "Get out of my life, I never want to see you again," and obviously this makes Buddy sad, so he ends up leaving. However, you know, now Michael is not really used to Buddy the Elf at the beginning. He doesn't really like him at first, but what I liked about this movie is how Walter's younger son at home, Michael, you know, he wasn't really infatuated, didn't really care for Buddy at first, but he grows to like him throughout the course of the movie. I thought that was a nice touch, you know. I especially like the scene when him and Michael, they're basically throwing snowballs at, like, a bunch of kids in his grade, you know. I thought that scene was rather funny. And closer to the end of the movie, you know, obviously, Walter, played by James Caan, he has a change of heart, and Michael comes in, and, you know, obviously Santa Claus comes to town and stuff like that, but his sled is not working and stuff like that. So Michael tries to go get his dad, and he says, "Not now, Michael, I'm in a meeting." And then I like the part when Michael says, "You don't care about me or Buddy, you only care about this job." But then, however, Walter, played by James Caan, is in the meeting, and he says, "Can this wait another time? Because some guy is in the office wanting to hear, you know, wanting to hear an idea." And then he says, "I flew all the way from this country to get here, and I am determined to hear what this idea is." And then I love the part when Walter, played by James Caan, is like, and he says, either you do this now, or if you leave this job, or if you leave this room, you are fired from this job." And then I love the part when Walter, played by James Caan, is like, "Up yours." And then his son, Walter, said, and then his son, no, not Walter, and I love the part when Walter's son, then played Michael, then says, "Up yours," and he's like, "Michael, no." And then they both cheer, and then, you know, Michael and of course, you know, Walter, played by James Caan, you know, they end up, leaving the place to go help Buddy the Elf, and Santa, his sleigh has crashed and stuff like that, and basically they need to get the sled working by Christmas cheer, and Michael is able to go on the news with Santa's real book of the naughty and nice list for Christmas, and is able to make everyone believe, and Santa is able to fly off and get the presents to everyone he needs to and stuff like that. And then the movie ends on a happy note where Jovi and Buddy, who were dating, have a baby, and they meet back up at the North Pole with of course Papa Elf. So yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review on a Christmas movie I rather like, and yeah, this is a modern Christmas classic for sure. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to give I am going to give the 2003 movie Elf a 9 out of 10. So yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you guys later. Bye bye now.